I've talked about the differences between democracies and republics in the past, but based on some things I've been seeing lately, I thought it'd be prudent to ponder what does it mean to live in a constitutional republic. So we'll do that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution, where we teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me. As always, head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. That's where you'll find everything we're working on here at the Constitution Study. You can find other videos, audio, articles. You can sign up for the newsletter. I do send out a newsletter once a month. And if you want, you can even get these articles and videos delivered directly to your inbox when they come out. I've had some people talking about issues getting access to my content through social media. Bypass the social media, go right to the source. It's also where you can support the Constitution Study, or you can request that I come speak at one of your events, either in person or over the internet. Most of all, it's where you can find resources you can share with friends and family to help spread this idea of rights and liberty, the blessings of liberty throughout our nation. So let's talk about what it means to live in a constitutional republic. For those of you who may not have seen my other articles or seen my other videos, a republic differs from a democracy in that a democracy, the people exercise legislative power directly. In a republic, people elect representatives to exercise their authority for them. See, when we were a colony, the power was very top-down. The king had most of the power. Yes, some had been delegated to Parliament, and it worked its way down to the individual person here in the colony. But when we declared independence, we inverted that. We said the people have the power, and that we create governments to protect our rights. And we even said if the government isn't protecting our rights, we have a right, even a duty, to alter or abolish it. The problem is we seem to have lost this idea that power resides with the people. That yes, we delegate some of our power to the state, they delegate some of their power to the federal government, to the union, but when in doubt, the power resides with the people. There's a quote I use from Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78. I use it quite frequently. It says, quote, "There is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it was exercised, is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than the principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid." Now think about that for a minute. What Alexander Hamilton is saying is, it's obvious, this is clear, that an act of a delegated authority contrary to its commission is void. So if we delegate authority to a state and it acts contrary to that commission, that act is void. The state's delegated power to the federal government, to the union. The state's delegated power to the union. So if the union acts outside of its commission, that act is void. And Hamilton goes on, "No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid." Now, this is a really, really important point nowadays. There's a lot of discussion about what's going on in Virginia and other states about things like Second Amendment sanctuaries, and in other states about legalizing marijuana or becoming immigration sanctuaries. They come from the standpoint that if the federal government passes a law, a legislative act, that is contrary to the Constitution, it cannot be valid. It cannot be valid. So when people say they are required to enforce federal law, well, only if that federal law is following the Constitution, pursuant thereof, to use language from Article 6. Now, the people in Virginia are doing the same thing to their government. They're saying, listen, you have a constitution that says you will not infringe on the right to keep and bear arms. Therefore, we will not enforce any legislation you pass that is contrary to your commission because it is not valid. Now, I know a lot of people, their minds are blowing. They're reaching for the duct tape to keep their head from exploding because that's not what we've been taught. Now, I'm not saying you can disregard any law just because you happen to think it may not be constitutional. You will have to stand and explain why what is being done is unconstitutional. But if we get the lawyers out of the picture and we just simply read the plain language of the Constitution, we find that, yeah, a lot of what our states are doing is unconstitutional, and a lot of what the federal government is doing is unconstitutional. Now, what does Alexander Hamilton say about this situation? The very situation he said, this is ridiculous. It's topsy-turvy. He says, to deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than his principal. Imagine some old Western where you've got the small town and you got the sheriff, and the sheriff has deputies. And imagine the deputies telling the sheriff what to do. Imagine the deputies telling the sheriff who they will arrest, whether or not they'll hold them, what laws they will enforce. Well, that's ridiculous, Paul. That would never happen. Well, that's exactly what's happening in our governments today. The governments are our deputies. We hire them to represent us, and they are acting outside of their commission. And to let it stand is to say that the deputy is greater than the principal. Alexander Hamilton says that the servant is above his master. We are supposed to be hiring public servants, men and women that will serve us as representatives, acting in our name. But yet it seems as soon as they are elected and put in place, they suddenly act like they're the master. They get to tell us what we can do. They'll tell us how much money we can make. They'll tell us where we can get health care. They'll tell us where we can go to school. They'll tell us what type of light bulbs we can use, how much water our toilets can use. They tell us everything. We hire public servants, but they suddenly become masters. He says that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves. That's exactly how they act. When asked, where the Constitution gave Congress the authority to pass the Affordable Care Act, Nancy Pelosi responded with, "Are you kidding me?" I forget the name, but there was a congressman there's a YouTube video of him saying, listen, Congress can do anything we can get a majority of people to agree to. Well, that's topsy-turvy. That's lawlessness. The supreme law of the land says, no, Congress can do these things and these things only. We've turned the whole system upside down. We have men not only doing what they're not authorized, but were specifically forbidden. And it happens because we've forgotten how the power is structured in this country. Because we've forgotten that the people in our state capitals and in Washington work for us. They are our employees. They are hired by us to represent us and to do things in our name. And then we let them act like our bosses, and we sit back going, oh, okay. We have become the servants. We have become the serfs. And even though that's illegal, that's against the law, it is a violation of the basic tenets of the law, we keep letting it happen. I describe it as the story of the emperor who has no clothes. The federal government, their power is limited, but we act like it's not. They walk around doing things they're not authorized to do, and we act like they do. We act like the government created us, not the other way around. And until somebody stands up and points and says, no, the emperor has no clothes, the federal government has no authority beyond what the Constitution says, I don't care what a congressman says, I don't even care what the Supreme Court says. The Supreme Court is a creation of the states. It is a creation of the Constitution, which is a compact amongst the states, which we the people created. They're wrong. They're human, they make mistakes. But because we won't correct their mistakes, they keep making bigger and bigger mistakes. I don't care. Does that mean I'm going to get punished for it? Yeah, probably. I mean, do you really think that the federal government's not going to come after some plebe like me when I tell them no? I'm waiting for some guy to set up with a census going, you have to fill out this form, in which case I'll say, no. You're allowed to know what the address is and how many people live here. Anything else is an invasion of privacy and something you're not authorized to do. Where's your warrant? Where's your probable cause? Where's your oath or affirmation that you have reason to believe you need this information? That I've done something wrong warranting you coming and interrogating me. See, since we don't know our rights, we don't know how the government is supposed to work, we don't know our rights, we don't act like citizens of a constitutional republic. We act like serfs. We act like plebes. We act like servants to a master government. Which is why I think they're so afraid that we might actually learn something. Just imagine what would happen if your representative came back to their district and had, a few hundred to a few thousand people reminding them of their job. Or not the job they tell you they're going to do, the job the Constitution says they actually are supposed to do. Imagine what happens if those in the federal government say, you know what, you don't have authorization for an EPA, or a Department of Energy, or a Department of Education, or for the Bureau of Land Management is only supposed to be restricted to forts and magazines in Washington, D.C. Imagine what happens when the American people stop pretending the emperor does have clothes and realize, no, the emperor is butt naked. Imagine what happens. So think about that for a little bit. Imagine what happens in America when we the people start being we the people again. When we realize that we formed this union through our states, that we did it for a reason, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Imagine what happens. Imagine what happens when the federal government is more afraid of the people than the people are of the government. Imagine what happens when people realize the reason we have a Second Amendment is so that we can protect ourselves from an out-of-control government, as well as out-of-control people. Just imagine what life would be like. Imagine if America was run based on what the Constitution actually says, as opposed to the words of a bunch of aristocrats and oligarchs in Washington, D.C. So head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com, comment, ask a question, leave a message, let me know. You see, education, I think, is the root of solving this problem. And here's the reason why. I've seen a lot of ideas for things like term limits and getting rid of different people in different positions. But here's the part that bothers me. If you take somebody out of a position and you put somebody who's been taught exactly the same in that position, all you've done is rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. Not until the American people require, demand, and enforce that people in elected office uphold their oath to support the Constitution will you start seeing a change. If you're rearranging the deck chairs while the Titanic is heading for the iceberg, you're still going to hit the iceberg. If you want to avoid the iceberg, you need to turn the ship. And you don't do that by playing musical chairs. You do that by turning the ship. By putting people in charge who understand they have a job to do that is defined in black and white. And if they don't follow it, they'll get fired. So again, head over to the website. Let me know what you think. Tell me if this makes any sense. And if it does, hopefully I'll see you again next time on the Constitution Study.
One thing you have to know wherever you make your stand came from a long through line of everyday Americans.